Hi, y'all. Welcome back to Three Black Lives. This is episode 4, and in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at identity. And just as a recap of the past 3 episodes, again, we want to thank you everybody for the feedback and the comments. It's been, tremendous, and obviously, I know this is a conversation that we all want to be able to have. We have launched our Facebook group on was it about a week ago? If you guys looking at this, that's probably the third week of October or what have you. Go ahead, like that. We're going to be putting in our Facebook Live events when we take the opportunity to be able to respond to some of y'all's questions. They're going to be going on there, and that's just an easy way to make sure that you guys can stay active with us and post your comments. We have a running conversation going there. So as we kick it off into it, we just want to take a look at identity. How do we identify as people, whether it's Black, white, Hispanic? Do we look more at our ethnicity about where we're coming from? Are we Irish? Are we Nigerian? What have you? So we want to be able to take a look at that. We'll give a bit about how we identify as individuals and speak about that. And then hopefully we can start seeing how that causes a dissonance when we start looking at race relations, and what way can we work to try to make that better, so that we're instead of seeing people as maybe just as a label, we see people more as, again, just straight up as people. So without being said, kick it off to one of my biracial brethren over here, my Jamaican friend Timon.
The alliteration, excellent.
Right?
Yeah, man.
Technically, we're kind of like two Black lives. Like,
Hey.
Just kidding. On that note, on that politically incorrect note, we got into our background a little bit in episode 1, but just as a recap, my mom is white. She was born in the U.S. Her parents were also, but her ethnic origin is from Russia and Czechoslovakia, which doesn't even exist as a country anymore. So it's that actually helps to highlight the difference between like national identity and ethnic identity. But my dad is Jamaican, was born there, was an immigrant, and I grew up in New York City. So I guess with the racial climate at the time and the fact that New York City is just like an amazing melting pot of culture in general, I guess I always just kind of saw myself as something else, not really Black or white, not really connected to Jamaica or Russia or non-existent Czechoslovakia. So, I didn't have that ethnic identity, but, I was just a kid. You don't really have to think about that too much when you're a kid. But I did, understand and appreciate the difference between someone from Pakistan and India, or someone from Mexico and Colombia, or Puerto Rico and Haiti, whatever it was. Like, to me, I saw a lot of blends. Like, you look at my classes, my pictures from my elementary school classes, and it's awesome. It looks like a Benetton hat. Like, it's just like a rainbow of people who are slightly different. And I think for that reason that I always appreciated different races and ethnicities and cultures. I still didn't really think about it, like why we identify ourselves as Black and white. That was something that really took up until college, where I found that people actually, there was a distinction between them, which now seems like, duh, of course there is. But, like Black and Jamaican are not the same thing. You have people who will identify themselves as Black. You have other people who will identify themselves as African American. You have some people who are like, well, I'm neither Black nor African American. Like, I guess I'm Caribbean American or whatever it is. Like, it doesn't fit the big schemas that a lot of people look at with Black and white. So with my parents being of different races, I would often just say that I was biracial for short. However, now I try to actually focus more on the ethnicity, because that's actually, to me, is more important. And say that, I'm Jamaican and I'm a European mix, I'll say I'm Russian and Czechoslovakian. And the reason that I do that is because I want people to know that race is actually less of a factor than like where we're from. If I'm feeling lazy, or it's someone that I feel like gets it, I might cut corners and just say I'm Black, because I do identify as Black also, mostly because that's the way I was perceived. Like a lot of our identity comes from the way people identify us. It's reflexive. We can't really help it. So yeah, I'm black. You could say I'm black and white. I wouldn't really ever say I'm white just because no one would ever look at me and say I'm white. And like I said, that shapes a lot of it. But my go-to answer is that I'm Jamaican and Eastern European. And then I'll elaborate on that if people care.
Makes sense. What about you, Bryce? What do you identify as?
Man, it's evolved over the years. You know, much like Time, and I'm also from proudly African. I'm from a biracial family as well. My father is from upstate New York, and his grandparents are Irish immigrants from what they affectionately refer to as the old country. And my mother is an African American woman from Richmond. You know, my family was always diverse, though. You know, sort of in that similar Benetton UNICEF kind of way, and it never really occurred to me. And, you know, I mean, the story's similar to Timon's. It never really occurred to me, you know, like, why do people trip off the fact that you look different? One of my uncles married a Korean woman. I have Korean cousins. I obviously have black cousins. I have white cousins. It was never weird to me to be with my aunt who's white and my aunt who's Korean and my other cousins who, you know, it was just all kind of, it was just never a thing. And it didn't occur to me really until I was growing up and, you know, had a little bit of an identity crisis. And as a young kid, you know, going out and into society as, you know, it can go two different ways. It could be you know, I fit in everywhere and I can relate to everyone and that's great. What it actually turned into, at least for me, was a little bit of not belonging to anything, you know, and the way I look made me a little too black to be white, you know, but I was obviously had, you know, influenced by my father for better or for worse. Obviously I think for better, but who, you know, would ascribe to traditionally white things culturally. You know, he taught me how to play the piano and to love like bluegrass music and etudes and arpeggios and shit. And so, you know, in that vein, I was a little too white to be black, you know, and the way that we structured our cultural norms and how we ascribed those to ethnicities, I couldn't find a place to fit. And it was weird for a couple of years. And I'm so thankful for those years because that forced me to just make me, you know, and for you guys who know me well, it's turned out terribly. But
without a doubt, pretty shitty.
You know, it taught me to be so much more than what you see or than what you think I am. And Timon hit it on the head. Look, so much of that's reflexive. Like I would never go to someone and be like, I'm a quarter Irish. Well, I am. It's true. But there's no way in hell anybody's like, yeah, of course, right? Dublin, probably. Don't have a lot of Belfast in you, but, you know, I can see it, right? That just doesn't fly. You know, so, you know, the way that I identify, and I'm going to confess that it's probably out of laziness. I don't really just give a fuck about you. I don't want to explain it to you. I don't have to, right? I am what I am and who I am based on sort of my dichotomous upbringing that goes so far beyond, you know, what you can see, right? And I think all three of us to some degree, probably mostly me, revel in the fact of someone looking at you and then that face they make when they realize they were totally wrong about how they thought you were and what they thought you were and who they thought you were all about. That moment is nearly better than sex for me, right? And that's just sort of how I've built this whole thing, right? I love that. And, you know, so, you know, the short answer is, you know, people ask, I probably take the same tact. I say I'm biracial or I'm from a racially diverse family. But I've also just been like, yeah, I'm a, you know, young black male. Right. And that's just sort of the way it is. Not because I feel like I'm bound by that, but frankly, I don't really want to have to explain it to you, you know, and maybe that's wrong on my part. Maybe I should take more time to, but I want to ascend past that, you know, and I just want to be all the reprehensible things that I am, regardless of how I look.
No, so I mean, a couple things I want to hit on in there. One, I commend you for naming 2 cities in Ireland. I know that was probably real hard for you, and it's probably the only 2 you can think of right now.
I got a computer here. I can Google whatever the fuck I want.
But again, like I think we might be able to touch on a little bit of it within this conversation is, you know, being too black for one thing, but being too white for another. And I think that brings in a lot in what defines that, right? But again, before we start looking at that, I'll tell about myself. So again, like everybody has seen from the first episode, both my parents are black. That's pretty much all I know. I've always identified as black. It's like, what are you? I'm, I don't know, I'm a black male. Uh, when it comes to ethnicity, I have no idea what part of Africa my descendants might have been. I assume West Africa, just based off of the slave trade, right? That's kind of the history that we've been told. So I like soccer. Nigeria had a good soccer team. I was like, all right, cool. I can be like JJ, coach, and I'm gonna claim Nigeria, right? So it's always been one of those things where I really just have no idea, and it's just really I'm just black. My parents. It's funny. I guess I think we hit on the first episode. My dad went to the same high school as Price's mom, but both my parents grew up in Richmond. Got a lot of family down in South Boston, Virginia. So I got a little bit of country in me. You don't see it because I live up in outside of a city, and I grew up in the suburbs. I'm not really country at all. You ain't gonna catch my ass outside doing a whole lot of anything besides playing soccer. But I've never had that dichotomy. It's like, well, what are you? Well, I'm black. That's about it. But it was interesting growing up because time and you talked about your classes. My classes, I was one of maybe 3 or 4 black kids that were in an accelerated class in a focus group or what have you. So I was always within a white community. And so that part growing up, I mean, you hear the whole thing. Oh, well, he's an Oreo, right? Because he's black on the outside, but he's white on the inside. It's like, well, what does that mean? How are we identifying that? And so I think it's going to be interesting once we start talking about ethnicity and a little bit about culture in here, is what actually defines what black is or what white is versus where we're from. Okay, I understand. Want to talk about ethnicity? Okay, cool. We're from here, but does that define who I am? And I think that's going to be an interesting conversation as we start going a little bit deeper into this. So no, I guess with that being said, I mean, what do you guys see as defining a person? Is it ethnicity, where they're from? Is it where they grew up? I mean, what is y'all's take on that?
Well, I mean, on a personal level, for me, it's like ideology and philosophy, which can be shaped by a bunch of different things. And, at least for me in America, I feel like race was a big one. And that was just the times. Like, I was born in '88. That wasn't like the '60s, but it still wasn't like a time when like black people and white people were getting married and having kids. Like, when my parents were dating in Cleveland, Ohio, like in the suburbs of Cleveland, which is still some of the demographically like the whitest neighborhoods in the United States, like the dirty looks, they actually had people like screaming at them that my mom was like a nigger lover, like actual real talk. People were saying that in the '80s. So racial conflict to a certain degree was always present in our family. And, like we didn't really want to talk about it, but I think we picked up on it. Kids pick up on those kinds of things. And then like when the OJ trial happened, for example, which was like a really racially charged moment, like that was one of the first times I remember feeling like torn. It was like almost like unanimously black people were like, nah, he's innocent. We lost that one. But white people were like, he's guilty. And then it became more of a racial issue than it should have been an actual court case. And, if anyone watched the OJ 30 for 30s, like just think about his racial identity. And like, now you see how complicated it really is. Like, he didn't think about his race at all. He didn't see it as like, I'm a black person at all. He's like, I'm OJ.
He was living it up.
Yeah, right. Me, I kind of always saw it as like, I'm a black person. And like in class, like my class was separated out. They did tracking back in the day, which is really an unethical practice where they like separate certain kids and put them on a different track. But within my school was all black, and my class was pretty much most of the white kids in the school with like a few high achieving minorities. And I think it was in those moments, like you said, Willie, where I started to really like notice that I was black. Like, it was normally when I was around people who were different than me, when I was a little bit out of my blended setting that, I really started to figure out what defined me. And that continued, especially when I started going to boarding schools in 8th grade and through high school, where there were literally like a handful of us. And I think actually only 2 in my graduating class in middle school. So and I think since then, being a Black American has always been at the core of my identity. And race, regardless of whether it should or not, has taken a place in the forefront, and just as like the context, as we always will try and provide on these in these episodes. Race was a social construct. Race is not like a thing that's in our DNA. Race was a class system put in place to justify enslaving certain people, Blacks, while others, whites, could enjoy a different set of freedoms and rights. Like, there was nothing in my DNA that was black and white. Like, there's Jamaican and there's Russian and there's Czechoslovakian. And that's why I try and identify with it now. Because my hope, maybe it's naive, is that one day, like, black and white go away because they don't define who we are. I don't think they should. If they do, I understand it, given where we're coming from. But for me, I try not to let the racial classifications define who I am. For me, it's much more about ethnicity.
All right, Craig, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the story that we all have of education, is something that's really interesting to consider, and it goes into a much bigger discussion. But we look at that and we say, okay, we were maybe the only or one of very few Black kids in our classes. And it's not a demographic thing necessarily, especially in the schools that, we went to, or at least I went to public school, and there were plenty of Black kids floating around, and they're not dumb and they're not all fucking morons, and so like, how do we get into that? When did we get to the point where achieving at that level became like a white thing, right? And it's not because these people are stupid. I know that for a fact, and these people were super cool to me and super nice, but my world became structured by race. It became basketball team was a lot of my Black friends, right? AP Physics I was the only Black kid in my section. There was 2 other dudes in different sections, 3 out of what was ostensibly 60, 65 kids, right? And, and that's sort of, just sort of drop a dime on where we're going to go with this, but to talk about that, and we don't like to talk about that, and we don't like to think about that. We joke about it, and we're pretty glib about it. And we're just like, oh yeah, that's those kind of white Black guys, and that's great. But I mean, that, if you flesh that out, is an issue, right? And you look at that achievement and that access to opportunity, where does that lead us? And sort of where are we socially? That's a thing that we're just all right with, and we just pass off as, these guys are sort of lost causes. But to get back to a little anecdote about when I was young, I think this is probably 1990 when I was about 2, and I'm toddling around with my dad, who by the looks of it, looks nothing like me. He's super tall, super skinny, kind of looks like Egon from the Ghostbusters. And we're toddling around, and this woman comes up, and she's super nice, and she's really excited about our interaction and about how connected we seem. And my dad's one of my closest friends, and she ends up asking, and you can see if you're not watching it, Simon's like ruefully shaking his head. But she asked the question, which I'm sure many of you are predicting, and she says, "When did you adopt him?" And my dad's like, "No, this is my son." And she persistently, very genuinely and sweetly, though, was like, no, I know. And like, that's so fantastic of you. And my dad's like a super cool dude. And he was just like, no, this is my kid. Like, this is mine, all mine. Like, right from the old.
I dropped that one from his
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's from my tank, So, but. Again, and again, something that I joke about. I think it's hilarious, right? But I think about that, and that's another part. That's another layer of, I think, why I'm much less quick to just ascribe cultural norms to people based on how they look, because I know what that's like, right? And I think it's really important for all of us to acknowledge that this is not us being like high and mighty, like, oh, 3 Black guys went to William and Mary, like, well, what the fuck do you know? I understand, and we all understand what it means to look how we look. I don't pretend like I don't look like this. I don't pretend that I'm not a Black male in America. I get that, and I understand that.
Black male in a hoodie.
This is actually a Eeyore onesie.
But it's I was about to say, it's an Eeyore hoodie.
Yeah.
So So
Yeah,
again,
right.
we're dealing with all levels of crisis here.
I'm going everywhere right now. But that's a good, question and something we'll talk about. I mean, we'll get into this whole airport thing and, all this hilarious stuff. But again, we understand that we are what we are, how we look, right? And this reflexive thing that Tom was talking about, look, we are seen as young black men in America, which to the outside means something. Doesn't matter where we went to school. Doesn't matter what we got on our SATs. It doesn't matter, how many Bach concertos we can name, how many Broadway shows we've been to. We are to a lot of society exactly what you see. You see earrings, you see tattoos, you see what we look like. That is terrifying to a lot of people, So because I know what that's like, I am hesitant to define myself by that because I don't want to be defined by that, and I think that I am okay with working 75% harder, right, to make sure that I'm more that you can see, right? And that, and that's not abandoning being black, right, or anything like that. That's being a version of myself that's, that's unpredictable. That's all these things that I like, right? And then, the things that I enjoy, just like I think we all sort of strive to, be a version of, to be individuals, and so, my sort of quest in, in this, but also in, sort of going out in the world is to challenge myself to look at people and not snap to the judgments that I know people do when they look at me and when they look at us, to see, traditional Muslim and not immediately be like weirded out about what they're doing, to be like, well, that's just, a dude practicing his faith. That shouldn't be weird, and to continue to challenge that. And even we look at white America to see like, oh, that white dude in a suit with glasses, definitely smart as shit, never gets laid. Well, okay, whatever, that could be any number of things, right? And that's, and so, I think that to make a long story short, I'm trying hard to challenge myself, as I would challenge everybody listening to this, to take a step back, to take a step back and to consider yourself and to think about how you think you're identified and how you think people think about you versus how you would describe yourself.
So I think I'm going to take a different view than what y'all have been saying. Okay, so Simon, I know you said that it's funny, I keep on looking down at the screen here where you guys are at. Time, you keep on talking about, or you talked about wanting to identify by ethnicity. Price, you're trying to, hopefully you rise above the label of race and what might define somebody. I think that I don't think that we're ever going to get to, well, I don't want to say never. I don't like speaking in absolute terms, but I think it's going to be extremely hard. And I don't think it's going to happen within our lifetime that we're going to start defining people by ethnicity. And I think a lot of it comes from Black America. I think we talked about a little bit offline beforehand. A lot of Black America doesn't know where their descendants came from, right? So I think if you don't have any idea about your true roots, your fallback is going to be, well, I'm Black. When you think of American, for me anyway, there's not one person that is American, right? I think that's a little bit hard of a construct to build. Obviously, I grew up in this country. I lived in this country my whole life. Versus if I think of, what does a Swedish person look like? Right? Well, I think blonde hair, blue eyes, things like that, right? So, I praise, so you can think about those type of things, but I think especially for Black America, I think that defining by ethnicity is going to be extremely tough, just based on the fact that a lot of people don't have those roots traced back to, the quote motherland. Price,
Doesn't even necessarily need to be. I hear what you're saying 100%,
yeah.
And we'll get back to it. But being modern Black American, that can be an ethnicity. Like it doesn't have to be a foreign country. Like if you identify with being a Black American, like of course I do heavily. This web series has come about because I think all three of us do. It's called 3 Black Lives for a reason. And even if you found out where your family was from historically, you still didn't grow up with that culture. You still didn't, you still aren't that anymore. So it's one thing, like me, I have a parent from another country, took me there every summer. But yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with just being a Black American, as long as we get it to the point where people don't see all the different ethnicities of Black people as just Black, or on the other side, seeing like Italian and Polish and Swedish and Australian as just white, and just kind of trying to like Price said, challenge ourselves to diversify that a little bit. My bad for cutting you off, but yeah, you know, I think that's a really great point to make, is that we're not trying to like cheapen the fact that we're all Americans, or put it in the background, whereas like our ethnic origins becomes more important. But it's just one way to question like who you are, to figure out your own individual identity.
Yeah, and I think that ties into.
I'll let you finish, but Timon had the dopest soliloquy of this episode.
So what?
I'm sorry. Continue.
No, you over here talking, whatever. No, so I mean that kind of piggybacks off what I was going to say next, though, for that one too, Timon, is that I don't think where everyone. I think there will always be a black and white, but you hit on it. You got to look more than just the surface. It can't just be black and white. Like, I think the biggest thing that we have to do as a people is being, again, it's been my driving theme throughout this whole process, is just empathy. Can we understand where other people are coming from, and not necessarily say that this is a black thing or this is a white thing. I mean, honestly, you still see color, you know. I know people like to say that they don't see color.
No.
I feel like
everyone who's ever said that.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. Try driving through that gray light in front of you. See if you make
the dumbest goddamn thing. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, right. So we're all on the same page with that one, that you will always see color, but it's a fact of your reaction when you see that. Yeah, right now, there can be positive or negative feelings. We'll get into bias in another episode, but there will always be that type of distinction, but it's a matter of just seeing people as people, realizing that, yeah, okay, he might be a white guy, he might be a black guy, Hispanic guy, what have you. All right, but he's still, I mean, he's a person. What is this person about? What more is there to be able to look at and to learn? And what can I get from this person in terms of, you know, broadening my world perspective? You know, maybe they have cool stories. Maybe they came from a different country. Maybe they have, you know, X experience. So I think that as we start looking at the identity of people, again, I think it's a driver of a very important conversation where, all right, cool, yeah, hey, Price, you're a black guy. Tom, you're a black guy. But now that we get a little bit deeper, it's like, okay, well, now he's just not a, quote, race, or not just a color. He's a person that, you know, he has a life, he has experiences, and now you're seeing people for what they are versus just as a label that can be used as a divider. And so having those conversations are very important, because it gets us past the point of having race be a divider or ethnicity be a divider, but now it can be more of a unifier, because now you want to hear people's stories and you don't want to be afraid. Can we get those conversations out so that way there's a better understanding of where people are coming from and, you know, why they might feel the way that they do, and by having that understanding, now you become a more unified people versus putting people in the buckets and saying, you know what, you go over there and you stay and you do your own thing. Talking, having conversations builds empathy. Building empathy builds a better, in my eyes, a better society, as there's better understanding and there's less, what's the word I'm looking for? There's less, I guess you say, prejudice. Again, it's, you know, dovetailing into the following episode.
God damn, dude, you went full kumbaya.
Hey man, back in I think it was elementary school, when I first found out what the word pacifist meant, I was like, oh y'all,
I'm gonna be that.
Definitely a pacifist. I said that because I was always one of the smallest people, and I was like, yo, if I preach I'm a pacifist, I would never get my ass kicked.
There to go, Switzerland. Yeah, but I mean, look, you brought it up, and you know, just quickly, like, yeah, I don't see color is basically the majority antiseptic for their own conscience. It's just basically a way for people to say, no, we're all alike, and you are just like me, and it almost, you know, and look, this is going to be a whole other episode of like kind of dumb, accidentally offensive shit that people have said to you, but that falls into that category, right? Because it almost diminishes the fact, like, no, hold on, time out. Like, you know, your history and your heritage. No, you see color. Everyone sees color, and you better see color because there's a goddamn good reason why we are where we are, and that's because, you know, that exists, right? But look, I mean, the last thing I want to say is that, whatever, ethnicity you are, whatever race you ascribe to, be proud of it, right? Be proud of it and understand that, it will influence you inevitably, and like I said, we are young black males, and I'm super fucking proud of that. And even the shit that I don't love about it that comes with it socially, I'm proud of it, and I'm going to work my ass off to make a change, right? And to make sure that the next generation of young black males is viewed better than ours, and so be proud of that, and it will influence you, but it doesn't define you, and you can be influenced by so many different cultures solely based on shit you think is cool. And I know we all are, and we all have things that we, do or say or wear or listen to that people be like, whoa, that's not like a black thing. That's
I
not
watched Dragon Ball Z on the reg. So.
Yeah, you guys had like a hella long anime conversation in this thread, right? And there's shit like that all the time, and we need to get past the point of being like, well, that you don't check that box, so you're out of this race, and it can't be that sort of game, right? Because there's so much more. I know this gets super trite of all this being like, there's so much more. We're all just people, and I know that sounds lame as shit, and it's more complicated than that. I get that, but at the end of the day, understand that. You guys all said it. It's reflexive. You can't change, the way that society views you. You have to be hip to that. You have to. We can't show up to a job interview in a hoodie and capris and be like, yeah, I'm here for your 4:30 and I'll be your new director of marketing. We can bitch about that all day, but the simple fact of the matter is we can fight that fight, but we're not going to win that one on a one-off. We're not, right? And that's something that we can talk about later, right? But, I don't think that diminishes, if you wear like there's all this shit of you like selling out. Look, that doesn't diminish you as a black male. I don't think that at all. I think part of being, and part of the growth is being able to say, look, I understand what I am. I'm proud of who I am. There's a construct in place that doesn't necessarily benefit every part of how society sees me. Be proud of that, man. Be proud of that, own that shit, and listen to everything Willie says and only half of what I say.
Yeah.
My final thoughts, just again, the I don't see color thing. Let's just put that out of the way, because it's one thing to say I don't see our color as differences, but what you're saying when you say I don't see color is that most of the time the people who are saying that are the kind of people who don't like to have conversations about race relations. They just want to get past it, and their way of doing that is being like, well, I can't have this discussion because I see all of you as the same. You're not doing me a solid by not seeing the fact that we're different. The goal is to see the fact that we're different and be okay with it, not to just gloss over the fact that there's any differences between us. And what Willie was talking about earlier with empathy and understanding, I think the point that we're trying to make here to tie it all together is that you learn empathy by understanding the other person. You can't understand them unless you know where they're from and what makes them who they are. That's their nationality, that's their ethnicity, that's just their philosophy on things. And so if you really want to not see color and notice the similarities and differences between people, the only way to do that is to be educated on different cultures. And I count myself lucky that I grew up and lived in inner cities where things are so diverse, but it's actually really hard to do that if you're from like a really homogenous neighborhood, like if you're from a bubble or if you're from like the burbs. So some people at home watching this or listening might wonder, like, what can we do? And the first thing you can do, you can have conversations, or you can like go to museums, you can read books. There's lots of ways to on your own time and at your own pace, look into different cultures. And I promise you'll be better off for doing it, and we all will.
No, again, this is a wrap up for everybody's thoughts. 100% agree. I don't think glossing over the fact that there are different races and ethnicities is the way to go. Identify them, face them. If you continue to try to sweep it under the rug like it doesn't exist, nothing will ever get confronted, right? They always say face your problems head on. Well, race relations is an issue within America. Can you face it head on and really have these type of open and honest discussions? And it draws empathy, and then we talked about it. But I guess the challenge is, that we want to pose to the listeners and viewers, right? Who have you spoken to outside of your circle? What have you done to try to be able to learn about somebody else's culture? You know, is it going to a restaurant? Is it going to a museum like Timon has mentioned beforehand? But can we do more to try to bridge the gap between us and somebody that we might not usually interact with on a daily basis? You know, and I think that's just my main point, you know, or the main point of this. Have the discussions, have those talks, ask those questions, and again, just try to know more about your fellow man. And I think everybody will get a benefit out of it. You know, we all will become better people, and as a society, I think we can start moving forward as that as well.
And also
Yeah.
ask the question of how you identify. Like,
Yeah.
know who you are. If you just see yourself as white or black, that's cool. It's whatever. But you know, maybe it's a chance for you to explore deeper and see if there's something else that's, you know, related to a different culture that you have actually been influenced by.
Yep.
So just ask yourself that question, like, what am I?
Definitely, definitely. And so again, with that being said, you know, y'all just hit us back up. You know, tell us how you identify. You know, tell us how you're able to expand maybe your own knowledge of other people's cultures, or how others might be able to, you know, perceive you, or how you perceive other people. You know, share that information with us, and you know, that way we can get back to you guys and start hitting those Facebook, you know, live events and get that conversation going. You know, but with that being said, you know, thank you everybody for again checking us out. We'll be again responding to your questions on Facebook Live events. We might even just have a random Facebook Live rant. I know Price is all about his rants.
Come on, man. Don't, man.
Yeah, Price, you
Yeah,
like a rant,
all
man.
right. All right. Just tee me up.
All right, but again, with that being said, you know, hit us up. Look out for the next episode. We'll start looking more at prejudice and bias and how that kind of ties into this identity, not necessarily crisis, but identity question that we're asking. And again, we'll see y'all, what, in 2 weeks? Sounds good.